Hi, Art 101. In this video, we'll take a look at sculpture from the Roman Empire to Neoclassicism. We're going to cover about 1,700 years worth of art in 10 minutes. We've got just one core concept today. We're going to watch how the Greek ideas influenced the practice of sculpture throughout this long period in Western history. And then, of course, from there, we're going to jump to the Americas and our topic at hand. Um, it's important to know that what happens between the Greek and Roman times is, and again, here's another 400 years of history in 20 seconds. Alexander unites the Greek city-states. This is Alexander the Great, of course. Conquers the Persian Empire and sets the groundwork for the Roman Empire. But importantly, he sought to Hellenize the world, meaning that he sought to bring Greek culture and values, spread it throughout the world, not just in the Greek city-states. And of course, he was influenced by his tutor Aristotle in this. Because of this, as the groundwork for the Roman Empire is laid, they adopt many of these Hellenic ideals. You can especially see it in their philosophical, their political, and their artistic culture. So what we're seeing in Roman sculpture that comes after Greek sculpture, and in fact, we now sort of kind of lump them today into the term Greco-Roman sculpture, are very much the same attitudes and techniques and subject matters and things brought to it. So there's very little change throughout the Roman Empire. And in fact, that really goes on through to the Renaissance. And we're going to jump to Donatello here in the 1400s. This is his famous sculpture, Judith and Holofernes. And it's an old Bible story. I don't know if you know it, but Holofernes is the Assyrian king, and he's gonna destroy Judith's city, but he's attracted to her, so she agrees to be seduced and gets him drunk. And when he passes out, she beheads him to save her city. And so this is a depiction. It was really a depiction of regular people standing up against tyrants. So it was a popular theme in Florence, Italy at the time. Hence the popularity of it as a kind of modern day retelling of this particular fable. It's also an interesting sculpture because, as you can see from these few views, it was produced in the round, and Donatello was one of the earliest to do this, which really meant that no matter, because of the two faces and the poses, no matter where you stand around it, you'll always see one of the faces and be able to engage sort of in the emotional conflict of the sculpture for that reason. So it's really designed to be a compelling and evocative sculpture, no matter from where you look at it. And that is sort of a Renaissance innovation. Here we see his David, and that, of course, is also the biblical David who slays Goliath. He is later followed in this popular theme in art at the time by another well-known Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle. Here's Michelangelo's David, of course, was commissioned to stand at the gate of a city, to a small city, so that larger entities might recognize that, well, like David, this seems like a small and inconsequential city, but it's probably capable of courageous and great things. So it was really meant as a warning to those who passed. There's a great article in the New Yorker that we'll read about this later on. And Michelangelo, of course, creates the famous Pietà. And remember, at this point, the Catholic Church is primarily responsible for commissioning works of art, and also the Church itself, but also wealthy aristocratic people, all of whom are really involved with the Church in this period of time. And so the majority of sculpture that we'll see come out of this entire epic is primarily religious, right? Two major themes: religion, Bible stories, what we call allegorical themes, either allegories coming from the Bible or allegories coming from Greek mythology. And of course, as we move through the Renaissance, we'll see Cellini's Perseus with the head of Medusa, another very popular theme from Greek mythology. And again, if you look at this, now we're casting in bronze, which is a relatively new thing that's happening in sculpture. But beyond that, if you look at the figuration, you can see the counterpose here. You can see the attention to proportion and musculature. So we see, and of course the subject matter itself, we see a very direct reflection of the classical Greek period. The Renaissance, of course, means rebirth, and its very rebirth was that of Greek ideals into European culture. We'll finish up the Renaissance with one of my favorites, Bernini's sculpture of the Adduction of Proserpina, and her he drags her off to hell to be his bride, and it's a fantastic example of what we call late Renaissance or Baroque sculpture, where a heightened sense of action and urgency sort of re-emerges in there. But if you remember the Hellenic period, that of course is very much alive in that. In fact, I think that it's Pluto, I guess, in the Roman, right? I think Hades, if I remember, in the Greek, the god of the underworld. Looks very similar to Laocoon, right, in the Greek sculpture, right? Very, very sort of similar likeness in that way. And of course, the emotive content of this sculpture. It's a magnificent sculpture in that way. If you look at the, again, she's sort of being dragged off to a doom, an insufferable doom against her will, and so she's fighting for it bravely. But also the figuration of this sculpture, really this sort of remarkable sense of action in the poses and things like that. My favorite detail is coming up here, is where Pluto is squeezing her thigh as he's grabbing her. Just look at the detail of that. That's marble. That's stone that was chipped away so that it looks like soft flesh that you can actually sort of see being squeezed and compressed. It's just magnificent. It kind of blows my mind every time I see it. Oh, wait, actually, one more real quick jaunt through the Renaissance here. We're going to move to Spain for another late Baroque artist, Pedro de Mena, and he's one of my favorites. Now, interestingly enough, he's working in wood. He's actually carving in wood, which is a very popular practice for regular people, but not for the high-end commissions of sculptures that we see the Catholic Church in that way. In fact, what he's doing, of course, is also painting the wood. It's a tradition known as polychrome wood sculpture. Polychrome simply meaning multiple colors or painted multiple colors. But again, the realisticness of and the authenticity of the pose and even the colors that they're in many ways they're great paintings as well as great sculptures. And of course, we see these biblical themes reverberating throughout. If you think about it, though, our very sort of Bible characters, Mary and Jesus in this case, they really do still mirror that concept of the Greeks, the Platonic ideal, right? The very notion of Jesus Christ, the God made flesh, is the specific instance of the ideal, right? So it very much in that way, we're still following these sort of basic strategies, if you will, of the ancient Greeks. De Mena and many other artists who practice this way would use glass in the eyes, and they would use this kind of sappy stuff, the clear thing to sort of create the tears and paint them on the face that way. These are really, really fantastic sculptures as well. They were made, many of these were also made for what you could call actually amusement parks, at least the equivalent today. People would go to a town and pay a few dollars to walk along a path, and along that path Bible stories would emerge where these lifelike figures would be there, and it would be sort of the same experience as if you think about a ride at Disneyland, but it would be like Bible stories coming to life with these extraordinarily lifelike figures. So they actually were, in some ways, that may be reflective of the way we look at our art as a source of entertainment. They were certainly that as well. Come the 1700s, as we emerge out of the Renaissance, our next great period of art is what's called the Neoclassical period. And it is literally an extension of the Renaissance in the sense that it drops all pretension about being about anything but the ancient Greeks. Neoclassic means exactly what it says, the new classical Greek art practice. It was influenced partly by the fact that it was at this time that European nations were going and excavating the Greek ruins and sites, and bringing back to other kingdoms in Europe, some of these examples. So there was a heightened interest in this art practice, and it began to be reflected in the modern art practice of the time. And Jean-Baptiste Pigalle is one of the more famous neoclassic sculptors in France at the time. And again, you can see, this is Venus, of course, so again, we see the Greek mythology, we see the sort of classic Greek figuration. If you are looking at these and go, boy, I don't know if I could even tell the difference between a 16th century sculpture and a 17th century sculpture and a Greek sculpture, it really does take an expert eye, because the practices and disciplines of them were so remarkably unwavering through this period of time. And of course, with that, the Greek ideas, the the representation of the ideal, the monumentalizing of virtue, of truth, beauty, and the good. And again, we can see that in statues like the Pietà and Domenech's Virgin Mary, right? We're looking at them as models of virtue, as things to aspire to. Much like the Greeks as well, grave markers were always a big thing throughout history. And here's one of Pagall's, I think, really magnificent tomb entrances. And we'll finish up with just one little last image of his. This really is sort of a surprising kind of move away from a strict classical neoclassicism, because here he actually creates a portrait of a specific individual. Voltaire was a famous Enlightenment philosopher and writer at the time, and was the author, if you will, of many of the Enlightenment ideas that come later to the New World and invent the modern world, if you want to look at it that way. And so he felt that Voltaire himself should be memorialized as a neoclassic sculptor, but he still poses him sort of obviously in a neoclassical kind of manner. So that kind of brings us through the history of sculpture up until the point, and you'll notice from this was made at the end of Pagall's life, 1777, and that number, of course, is right around the time that the United States is established. The Revolutionary War, of course, is going on by this point. And so you'll see that these ideas will translate very directly over to the New World. And in fact, our first and still probably most famous monumental sculpture was, of course, a gift from the French, and it was done in the neoclassic style. I'm sure you can guess what that sculpture is, and we will pick up our next little video there.